Welcome in to another episode of the Barnes on Bama podcast. Obviously, we have a live stream here today. Just to give you guys a little bit of heads up how we're going to do this, I am going to be watching the or the bracket release show on my side. I hope you guys do as well. And as soon as we have a bracket in front of us, I'm going to pop it up here on the screen. We're going to talk about what Alabama's placement is. Obviously, as soon as we get it, given if hopefully we're not the last team, that's kind of talked about. Whenever we see what Alabama's placement is, we're going to talk about what that looks like, who Alabama's going to be playing, where they're going to be headed, what region they're in, potentially what one seed they may have to match up with in the Sweet 16. Later on, we will get into, obviously, I'm sure people are going to have a lot of questions. I know I was out of town and wasn't able to do a recap following the Ole Miss game. It was awful, terrible loss. It's probably going to cost us a 3 seed. Realistically, we're likely looking at a 4 seed in this tournament release show that's going to be coming out here today. So if you guys are interested in this, like I said, go ahead and throw any comments you have in the YouTube comments, throw them wherever you got them, and then we'll definitely talk about this as it goes on. But like I said, I'm going to have the stream kind of pulled up on my side. I expect y'all to do the same so that y'all can see what the bracket is. Obviously, I'll talk through it as best I can, but of course, it's coming out on CBS Live. Can't put it on the stream because copyright issues and such. But they are getting ready to go live with that. The show just went live on my side, so let's see. My prediction is that we're going to be a 4 seed matched up with somebody, potentially Hawaii, a Hofstra. I've seen a few different 13 seeds. The 5 seeds I'm looking at us potentially facing is either Wisconsin or Texas Tech, likely. I think some of the other ones are potentially Arkansas or St. John's, and we've obviously played both of them, so we wouldn't play them in the second round. So we'll have to see what it actually looks like. But Alabama will not play somebody in the first or second round that they have played this season. So just as kind of a heads up. Bruce Pearl is going to be very upset because his son's team will not make the NCAA tournament today. They are probably going to deny an NIT bid. Duke gets the number 1 overall. No surprise there. This is a possible one for Alabama. That Friday, San Diego, California, it is an option for Alabama. So we'll have to see who the 4 seed is in this one. So we got Duke versus Siena. Ohio State. Versus TCU. St. John's, the 5 seed. This will not be Alabama then. Given the fact that Alabama played St. John's, this will not be Alabama. That means Alabama does at least avoid Duke. They were a 1 seed, obviously being the number 1 overall seed. You don't exactly want to play them. They only have 2 losses this season. Cam Boozer's elite. They are going to be without Caleb Foster and potentially Ngongba. So that's a little bit of a question mark, but looks like they're playing Northern Iowa. Kansas gets that 4 seed versus St. John's. Obviously 4-5. And Cal Baptist is the 13 seed there. Again, that was a possibility one for Alabama, given the fact that was in San Diego. I think the other one that's fairly likely for Alabama is the other one out west in Portland. So Louisville and South Florida. So it looks like Brian Hodgson gets an 11 seed and will be facing Louisville in the first round in Buffalo. So that'll be a fun one. Brian Hodgson gets to go back to Buffalo. Michigan State falls to the 3 line instead of the 2 line. North Dakota State is a 14. They were also one that I had seen potentially as a 13, so they're a 14 seed. That's another one just to kind of watch out for. Again, if y'all have any questions, throw them in the comments. I'll try to get to them as I can. As soon as we have a full bracket, I will throw it here on the screen. UCLA 7 seed versus UCF. So UCLA versus UCF. Ooh, UConn gets the 2 seed with Duke. So that 1, 2, 3, 4 is Duke, UConn, Michigan State, and Kansas. That's a pretty tough bracket. UConn versus Furman is a fairly tough matchup. If I was UConn, I would not be thrilled with getting Furman. Obviously, I know they were the 6th seed in their bracket, but Furman is a really good offensive team, and they definitely have an ability to beat somebody. I know he's talking St. John's and Kansas. However, Northern Iowa and Cal Baptist are going to be 2 pretty popular upset picks, if I was guessing. So just a little bit of a look at that one. That South Florida Louisville matchup, I really like that for Brian Hodgson. I think that Brian Hodgson going back to Buffalo, New York, I honestly think South Florida, definitely could win that game. To set up to, to set up the game with Michigan State. Okay, we're going to commercial. So that first one, what kind of question or what kind of thoughts do y'all have on that first part of the bracket? I think that's a good one for Alabama to avoid. I do think a couple of those teams were gettable, but I mean, you're talking Duke, UConn, Kansas, Michigan State, St. John's, Louisville, South Florida. I think that's a pretty good bracket, honestly. What are you guys' thoughts? Throw them down in the comments. As I said, I will have a reaction as soon as Alabama's is released, and we will throw the entire bracket up once we have it available to us. If you have any questions non-bracket related while we're at commercial, feel free to throw them. I don't want to go too deep into the Ole Miss stuff, but I'm more than happy to answer whatever y'all might have. I know this is a little bit slower live stream. Just obviously we're limited by CBS's release, and they got to get their ad revenue in. So not super surprising. If y'all are new around here and have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, we're on the road to 1,000 subs. I think we're just under 50 short. I think we're at like 954, 955. So if y'all could do me a favor and pop over from Twitter to subscribe, if you're on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. We are going to record with Jordan Harper of the of the Double Dribble podcast. Obviously, y'all have seen him on the show before. Jordan's really popular on Twitter. He obviously was formerly with Rivals and the Tide Illustrated Network. Does a lot of really good basketball coverage. I'm going to record with him tomorrow once we've had a little bit more time to digest the bracket. But I just wanted to go live today and kind of talk about it as kind of a gut instinct reaction. And then I'm going to do some research tonight and tomorrow. And then me and Jordan are going to record. So if y'all are interested in a real in depth breakdown of that, of kind of the first round matchup and what our potential second round matchup would be as well, subscribe to the channel because, like I said, going live with Jordan or going to record with Jordan tomorrow night to put that out. So hopefully y'all are interested. We're still sitting at commercial. I do think that Alabama's probably going to be across from Texas Tech. That's my kind of gut instinct. I think that Texas Tech is a reasonable matchup, especially given the fact that JT Toppin's out. I think that that's a matchup that's honestly fairly fortuitous for Alabama. So that's kind of what I'm personally hoping for, and I think that's fairly likely. But I think Wisconsin's another one that's definitely possible. Okay, Arizona is our 1 seed in this one. This is possible for Alabama as well. This is the Portland, Oregon. So if I had to guess, this is the one Alabama will be in. They'll be playing LIU, Long Island. 8-9 matchup is going to be Villanova as the 8 versus Utah State as the 9. So Villanova, Utah State face up versus Arizona, LIU. Again, I do think this is a very possible one for Alabama. Quite a few bracketologists had us in the West region for a little bit. Portland, Wisconsin is the 5 seed. This is a possibility because Alabama has not played Wisconsin this season. 12 seed High Point. So Wisconsin versus High Point. Four seed Arkansas. So Arkansas gets Arizona. Arkansas, Hawaii. That was one where a lot of people thought Alabama was going to be slotted in. They thought it was going to be Alabama, Hawaii, Wisconsin, High Point. So the fact that Alabama misses Arizona, this is going to be a good region. 6 seed BYU with AJ DeBansa. Texas makes the March Madness. Texas, NC State are going to be in the first 4 in the play-in to play against BYU. So Texas and NC State are going to play in that first 4 matchup on Tuesday and then play BYU. Gonzaga is the 3 seed. This is the bracket of teams that Alabama has played with Gonzaga and Arizona. So Kennesaw State. So Gonzaga will be playing Antoine Petway. Get that. That's 2 Nate Oates former assistants that did make the March Madness bracket this year, and Brian Hodgson at South Florida and Antoine Petway at Kennesaw State. Miami faces Missouri in St. Louis. So obviously Missouri gets to play in Missouri. That'll be a fun one. Miami versus Missouri should be a very good game. And Purdue is the 2 seed. So yeah, this is the bracket full of teams that Alabama had played before. Arkansas honestly got a murderer's row. So the 1, 2, 3, 4 in Arkansas's bracket is going to be Arizona as the 1, Purdue is the 2, Gonzaga is the 3, Arkansas is the 4, Michigan is the 5, or sorry, Wisconsin is the 5, BYU is the 6, Miami is the 7. So a fairly tough bracket, honestly. Arkansas um, likely can make the Sweet 16, but making it further, Darius Acuff is going to have some heroics. High Point, Wisconsin, and High Point should be a very very good game. I've not seen much of Hawaii this season, but honestly, I've heard that they're very good this season. Like I said, this is one that I think a lot of people thought Alabama was potentially going to be in, kind of a rematch bracket of sorts, and it doesn't look like it's going to be the case. So, very excited to see where Alabama falls now. Again, if y'all are new around here, consider subscribing. I am gonna record tomorrow with Jordan Harper, formerly of Tide Illustrated, currently of the Double Dribble podcast. We're gonna break down Alabama's path to March Madness and what the bracket looks like. May do some picks. That's gonna come out. I'm gonna record it tomorrow. If I can get it out tomorrow night, I will. If not, it's gonna come out first thing Tuesday morning. If y'all have any questions, throw them down in the comments. Like I said, I'm just watching this live, trying to see where Alabama is going to be placed. My gut says Midwest region, since we now are for sure not in the East or in the West. Um, Midwest is what I'd seen the most. But obviously, South would give us the closest locations to Alabama. So we'll be curious to see what this looks like. Again, we are headed to commercial break. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to throw them down in the comments on Twitter, on YouTube, wherever you're at. That is 2 brackets down. I was really surprised not to see Alabama in that bracket release for the West region. I thought that Arizona bracket potentially would have Alabama in it as the 4 seed. We had seen a lot of projections that had Alabama in that bracket with Arizona and with Gonzaga and with Purdue. So the fact that Alabama does not get that one, I think is huge. Obviously, one of the things that makes Nate Oates' offense so hard to contend with, especially in a bracket format, is having not faced them and not knowing the sets that they run, not knowing the speed they play with. It's really tough because they run, yes, a modern style of basketball, but they run it in a way that not many people do currently in the NCAA. And so even if you currently play fast, you don't play how Nate Oates plays fast. And so going up against us on short rest and short, time to prepare sometimes is difficult. That's why you've often seen like when Alabama does well, Alabama will win that first game and the second game ends up, even if it ends up being a little tougher, Alabama sometimes is able to have a good amount of success. And Alabama generally is just a tough team to prepare for in a bracket format. Um, I thought that getting a bracket like Arizona and Purdue and Gonzaga was definitely going to hurt us. Obviously, having faced all of those teams this season, I thought that was going to be a real detriment to Alabama's potential March Madness run. Obviously, you got to win your first game, you got to win your second game if you're going to have any kind of run. But to give yourself the best chance, having teams that you maybe haven't faced is a good option for Alabama, I believe. I think that Arizona also is a team that just matches up horribly with Alabama, given the fact of how big they are and how physical they are rebounding the basketball. I think that's just a really tough matchup, and so I would suspect that Alabama gets in the region with Michigan. And when if Alabama gets in that region with Michigan, then that would mean that Alabama potentially is going to be in the Midwest with Florida in the South. So it's looking like Michigan potentially is going to be the 1 seed that Alabama's matched up with. if what the expectations for Alabama being a 4 seed and the 4 seeds that we're expecting hold true. And given the fact that we already know that UConn is a 2 seed, I think that Florida obviously has locked down that final four or final number 1 seed. So I would suspect that it is going to be Michigan as the 1 seed in Alabama's bracket. It could be Florida, I believe, with bracket rules, since Alabama's only played Florida one time this year. I do believe it can be Florida, but I think it's going to be Michigan. We are back on the NCAA live stream, so let's see what the newest region that comes out is. As I said, when we have a full bracket, I will put it up here on the screen so that everyone can look at it. If you're not currently watching live, I really recommend you do so. Obviously, I'm not playing it here on the stream because I do not want to have copyright issues. But Midwest, this is the Michigan region. I would suspect this is Alabama's region. So Midwest, Michigan, the number 1 seed. They will face UMBC or Howard. First 4 matchup. Obviously, UMBC, the first ever 116 win. They potentially will face the 8 seed Georgia. Honestly, I think that Georgia with Sampto Cyril potentially could, if they shoot well. Ooh, St. Louis, that's a good team. So Georgia, St. Louis, that's a really good matchup. I think that Georgia or St. Louis potentially could give Michigan definitely a little bit of a run. 5 seed Texas Tech. Yeah, I do believe this is Alabama's region. If so, that means Alabama will be in Tampa playing on Friday. 12 seed Akron. So Texas Tech and Akron. Four-seed Alabama. We are correct. So Alabama will be playing in Tampa, the 4 seed, on Friday. And they will place Hofstra. So Alabama versus Hofstra, Texas Tech versus Akron. That is our 4 seed pod for these first 2 rounds. So it's Alabama and Hofstra and Texas Tech and Akron. Let's pull up a quick, obviously KenPom doesn't say it all, but let's see what a quick KenPom tells us about Hofstra. Just obviously at a glance, what is Hofstra? So Miami of Ohio did make the March Madness bracket. They're playing in Dayton in the first 4. Miami of Ohio likely got in over Auburn. So quite funny. Let's see. Hofstra per KenPom. Obviously, KenPom doesn't say all, but this just gives us a little bit of an idea of what we're looking at. Hofstra, coached by Speedy Claxton. They are currently sitting at 89th in offense, 95th in defense. They're a really, really slow offensive team at 317. A pretty good offensive rebounding team, so they definitely could hurt Alabama in that standpoint. They're currently 51st in the country, solid offensive rebound rate. Their defense is largely based on being just a good 2-point defensive team. because they force long twos. They're similar from Alabama. It looks like they may even play a little bit of a drop coverage because they're sixth in the country at forcing long twos. They don't force a lot of steals. Um, they played a decent schedule. Nobody crazy on this, but they did beat Syracuse. They did beat Pitt. I mean, this is a team that definitely has some solid wins. They played against UCF, that made March Madness with four with a 4-point loss the first game of the season. So this is a very solid Hofstra team. They have a 7-footer, Silas Sunday. So this is not a mid-major that's just playing a ton of tiny guys. They've got a 40% three-point shooter in Cruz Davis. They've got a 38% three-point shooter in Preston Edmed. Again, we will go through this. I don't want to just go through the Ken Palm breakdown, but I mean, this is a pretty big team because they run 7 foot and 6'10" at the 5 and the 4 starting. It looks like for the most part. So this is a fairly large team that Alabama is going to be facing. Um, you know, Hofstra seems to be a formidable mid major. Texas Tech, Akron, Alabama, Hofstra. Again, that's going to be our first 4 setup, and our 14 pod setup, and that's going to be in Tampa on Friday. So Alabama gets Michigan, Iowa State, Virginia, and Alabama. Looks like Kentucky is also in this region. Tennessee is also in this region. Yeah. Honestly, at a first glance, I think that Hofstra is a team that Alabama just needs to understand is a legitimately good team. Again, this is a team that's going to start a guy at 7 foot 280. They're also going to have a guy at 6'10", 235 coming off the bench. That his name's Victories from Spain. He has a 17% offensive rebounding rate, which is 10th in the country. This is just an incredibly good offensive rebounder. I mean, he had a game this season where he had 7 offensive rebounds. Alabama is just going to have to play their game and really understand that just because this is a mid major does not mean this is a bad team. I do think that Alabama is obviously just a better team. I think that Alabama could put some speed on them and could get them out to in a pace that just makes them uncomfortable. Uh, but I mean, this team has not lost by double digits at all this season. Hofstra's only losses this season, or their biggest losses this season were they lost to Iona by 8. They lost to Temple by 5, William and Mary by 7, in conference, Stony Brook by 5. I mean, this team has a lot of really close games. And again, they slow it down a lot. So this is a situation where Alabama really just has to play their game and understand it. I will say it does look like Hofstra does allow a decent number of 3-pointers, a decent number of assists. We'll be curious what type of defense they're going to try to play because, as you know, if somebody tries to play a zone defense against Alabama, it just gets kind of ugly. Alabama can shoot the lights out, and that's not something that Hofstra would be able to really play against. Obviously, I've not done a ton of research into them. I would need to do some research and see, what they play, what they're used to. Um, yeah, no, this is a very solid team that Alabama will be facing. Uh, Ginger Ninja says about as good of a draw as you could realistically ask for. 100%. I think that Duke has a worse draw than Alabama. I think that Duke has a pretty tough draw, honestly. As the number 1 overall seed, I mean Duke got, and I think it's already been tweeted out by like Evan Mia over on Twitter. or over on X. Let me pull this up. Evan Mia on Twitter says, pretty brutal draw for number one overall seed Duke. They get the 8 seed Ohio State, which is currently ranked at 22nd on his website, which is a 6 seed quality. Kansas or St. John's, which is Kansas was one of the most talented freshmen in the nation. 5 seed St. John's is 12th, so they're like more of a 3 seed quality. You get UConn and Danny Hurley. I mean, you just don't want to have to face Danny Hurley. Yeah, a pretty tough draw for Duke. Overall, I do think that's a solid matchup, or really tough matchup for them. I think that realistically, Alabama got as good of a draw, as Ginger said. I think as good of a draw as you could have asked for. We're gonna let this final region come out, and then we'll throw the whole bracket up. This is going to be Florida's region. Florida is going to be playing in Tampa with us. Obviously, we will not be playing Florida, but they will be in Tampa. Their pod is in Tampa with Alabama. Prairie View and Lehigh is who they'll be playing, or one or the other. 8 seed Clemson. Clemson and Iowa. Vandy gets a 5 seed. I think that's a little different because I do think that some people had them as a 4 seed, so Vandy gets a 5 seed. And they will be facing McNeese in Oklahoma City, sorry. They will get the 4 seed Nebraska. And Nebraska versus Troy is going to be the first round matchup in Oklahoma City for Nebraska. North Carolina, 6 seed. VCU is who North Carolina is going to be facing, and they talked about how Caleb Wilson is obviously a big reason why North Carolina sits on the 6th seed today. Obviously, they would have won a couple more games, but it's also you just have to consider what it's going to be when you're missing that guy for the rest of the season. Caleb Wilson's an elite player, and the fact that you're not going to have him has to matter. Illinois will be the 3 seed in that one in Greenville, South Carolina. So just for a potential setup, it's Illinois versus Penn for the Ivy League champion. Obviously Penn took down Yale earlier today. Illinois potentially sets up a matchup with in Greenville, South Carolina against UNC. If I'm Illinois, I'm not super thrilled with the fact that I'm going to potentially play North Carolina in South Carolina, but obviously no Caleb Wilson means that's a good one. St. Mary's gets a 7 seed versus Texas A&M. So St. Mary's versus Buckyball. That's going to be a very unique one. Obviously, we played Randy Bennett last season. A very slow style, and very curious to see what happens with Texas A&M. The 2 seed is Houston in this one. With the 15 seed Idaho. So in this bracket, we're looking at number 1 seed Florida, number 2 seed Houston, number 3 seed number 3 seed Illinois, number 4 seed Nebraska, number 5 seed Vandy. Hon Honestly, I think that Florida, um, has a very legitimate shot, but I mean, Vandy has to feel really good given the fact that they could potentially set up a Sweet 16 matchup, and they're gonna have a lot of confidence after that huge win in the SEC tournament. So, I think that like we said, I think that Alabama. Oh, I ate the rest of it, but it was Skinny Pop, avocado lime. Appreciate it, Stacy. Yeah, eh, Stacy said it. Y'all be sure to subscribe. I'm less than 50 subs away from 1K. Trying to hit it before the end of March Madness. If you're on Twitter, if you could hop over to YouTube and just give me a sub, I really would appreciate it. As I said, if y'all are interested, I am recording tomorrow night with Jordan Harper, formerly of Tide Illustrated, currently of um, the Dribble podcast, talking about Alabama basketball. Me and him are going to talk about Alabama's draw in March Madness. Obviously, we're giving you guys a little bit of a reaction today. As I said, I think that Hofstra is a great matchup for Alabama. I think that Alabama got as good of a draw in March Madness as they could have personally gotten. I think that that is a very solid matchup for Alabama, and I do think that Alabama should be very happy with the seeds that they got. The the SEC got 10 teams in, the Big 10 got 9, ACC 8, and Big 12 8. The first 4 out were Oklahoma, Auburn, San Diego State, and Indiana. So Indiana was not even the first team out. Oklahoma was. Blake Byler puts out a good tweet that, I want you guys to understand what you're witnessing for Alabama basketball. Alabama basketball in the years prior to Nate Oates had been a top 4 seed 4 times. 1982, 1987, 1991, and in 2002. Since Nate Oates has been there, they have been a top 4 seed 2021, 23, 24, 25, and 26. So that is where you have to kind of look at how incredibly insane Alabama has been this season. Really, really good. Um, Alabama's just been completely phenomenal. Um, under Nate Oates, and it's just insane that Alabama was able to do that. I'm gonna throw this. Okay, so while everybody else is still watching, and I'll put the rest of the bracket up later when we have it. But this is Alabama's region. Alabama's region that they draw in this tournament is the Midwest, and that Midwest region is headed up by Michigan, as you see. Alabama gets the 4 seed, Hofstra is the 13, and Texas Tech is the 5. Um, I do think that Alabama. I know Stacy just asked, can Alabama make the Sweet 16, or do they make the Sweet 16? I'm gonna say yes, and I think that part of the reason why I personally looked at Texas Tech as being the one that I thought that Alabama needed to get or was potentially going to get, um, really was kind of needed to get in my opinion, was that when you're going up against Texas Tech is missing their best player. And it sounds horrible to say it that way because obviously you don't want to have somebody missing anybody that hurts them as a team, but it's just a fact of the matter that they are missing their best player. JT Toppin for Texas Tech was their best player. He got hurt and he is not going to be playing for them. They still have Christian Anderson, that is an elite guard. That's 6'3", shooting 42% from three. They got Donovan Atwell at 6'5", shooting 45% from three. One of the top assist rate, or one of the top turnover rates in the country. They're a really, really good team. They also lost to Iowa State in their first round of their
Big 12 tournament by 22 points because of the injury, right? JT Toppin gets hurt against Arizona State, and they end up losing that game. Are able to beat Kansas State, Cincinnati, and Iowa State. They end the season with losses to TCU, BYU, and Iowa State, so they are on a little bit of a skid coming into this tournament. The question becomes, first and foremost, Alabama cannot overlook Hofstra. Because again, as I mentioned, Hofstra is a team that Alabama will be facing that is a much better or much bigger team than Alabama potentially has faced in the past. Additionally, when I'm looking at Ken Palm, Miami of Ohio is an 11 seed. High Point is a 12 seed. They're currently ranked in Ken Palm 92 and 93 in the country. Hofstra is a 13 seed and they're ranked 87. So they are the highest ranked 13 seed by a fairly wide margin. The next best 13 seed is Cal Baptist at 106. So you're talking like 20 spots in Ken Palm higher. And that just gives you an idea of what the analytics, how good the analytics think this team is, right? If we look at some of the teams that Alabama has faced this season that currently sit in that 87-ish range, you're talking about like a team like Yale. Yale sits currently at 81st in the country. Um, you're talking about a team that's a little better than South Carolina. South Carolina is 95th in the country. So this is a team that, but Ole Miss is 65th. Right? We look at Ole Miss, and Ole Miss is a team that, like, even though we look at them as analytically bad, they're still a solid team, right? This Hofstra team is better than South Carolina. So this is a team, and anybody can lose to South Carolina, right? Obviously, Alabama was able to handle their business against them, but South Carolina had wins in conference. I mean, they had a win over Oklahoma that likely kept Oklahoma out of March Madness. Um, they had a win against Ole Miss, right? They beat Ole Miss the last game of the season. Alabama lost to Ole Miss the next time they played them. So this is a situation where I think that you have to understand that Hofstra is not the kind of team that you can overestimate. And because of their size, they're going to be a little bit different than what Alabama is used to seeing when they face a mid major. I feel like every time I do these write ups and previews of the mid majors, if you're currently not used to, Alabama was the 14th overall seed for the record. Um, Duke got the hardest collective bracket. They were the 31 is their collective total of the top four seeds, whereas Alabama is in the easiest region at 37. The March Madness chair is talking about it. Let me see what he says. They're talking Miami of Ohio and VCU. Miami of Ohio was not the last team in. They're talking about key metrics. I'm sure Bruce is trying to figure out why his son did not make it.
Talked about SMU's wins over North Carolina, Louisville, and Texas A&M. They talked about losing Edwards and being able to get him back. They're taking that into consideration with SMU because they will get him back. Talked about how Texas and NC State are playing in the first four, and there was no way to avoid a matchup in the first four. So Texas and NC State have played this season, and they were unable to avoid that for the first four matchup. They had to do that due to how many teams the SEC and ACC got in and where they were seated, etc. They're talking about injury seeding with Caleb Wilson. I'm sure JT Toppin's also one going to be talked about. He just talked about JT Toppin obviously being a talking point for Texas Tech. And Alabama was the 14, so they were the second highest four seed. Is what they showed on the release. Okay. Okay, that was the last part of that release show that I wanted to kind of watch. I'm of the mindset, back to what we were talking about. I'm of the mindset that Alabama does make the Sweet 16. I think that getting a draw with Hofstra, Akron, Texas Tech, I think is a solid draw for Alabama. I think that Alabama um, definitely has an ability to beat these teams. I think that an Alabama Akron matchup, should it happen, would be a very, very fun matchup. Akron's a team that takes a lot of threes, that pushes the pace, would be a very up and down game for Alabama. They are also a team that, had a couple of decent games in the non-conference, and funny enough, two of the teams they lost to were two teams that Alabama played in Purdue and Yale. So Akron is a team that obviously wins the MAC. They had a loss to Miami of Ohio earlier in the season, but then went on to win the MAC conference tournament, beating Buffalo, Kent State, and Toledo. Um, they are a team that definitely would be able to. I think that they have an ability to beat a team like Texas Tech because they're going to be able to match them from a shooting perspective. More similarly, what you're expecting out of like um, a smaller team. Akron currently, per Ken Palm does not play anybody. They have one guy at 6'9". Nobody else in their main rotation is over 6'6". So that's more of what you're kind of expecting when you play these smaller mid majors, right? A lot of the mid majors that Alabama faced this season, that's what you end up seeing. And I will say that's kind of the unique thing about the Hofstra matchup for Alabama is Alabama got probably one of the only mid majors in the country that is going to start a 7-footer with a 6'8" two or four man, and Joshua Decady as the four man, and Silas Sunday as the starter at 7 foot. And then they're going to bring in a 6'10" victory on YouTube um, as the center, right? So they have some size that is fairly unique in a mid major. And that is something that Alabama definitely is going to have to pay attention to because oftentimes, we think about rebounding woes being largely tied to, oh, this team has a ton of bigs. And when you face a lot of mid majors, oh, like they're smaller, like we shouldn't have any problem rebounding them. And then you look at a team like, say, South Florida or all these different teams that Alabama has faced this season that are smaller, and yet they're still able to give Alabama some issues rebounding the basketball, right? South Florida actually out offensive rebounds Alabama and beats us on the rebounding battle by 1. They only had 1 guy on the entire team that was, that we played that was 6'10". He got 7 offensive rebounds, and Nate talked about how big an issue that was. Brian Hodgson even talked about how that was an issue, in the post game, and that was a major, major problem. And then, Alabama was able to go out and do much better the next game, and that's just really something that I think that Alabama needs to understand is just because you see mid-major and you see, hey, this is not an SEC team, that does not mean this is a tiny team. That does not mean this is a team that is subpar rebounding. That does not mean that this is a team that is subpar shooting. At a certain point, they had to win their conference. Alabama did not win its conference to get into this tournament, but Hofstra did. Hofstra obviously had to win multiple games in a few days to be able to make the March Madness. They also their March Madness or their last game that they played was on March the 10th. Their season ended on March the 3rd, and then their tournament bracket was the 8th, 9th, and 10th. So yes, they played 3 games in 3 days, but they also played less recently than Alabama. They played on Tuesday, whereas Alabama played on Friday. So I think that's also something you kind of have to understand when you're looking at these mid majors. Obviously, Alabama being able to get rest, but then also being able to be fully healthy for a game like this is really, really important. Hofstra already has been able to get ahead on that because they've now not played in 6 days. Now, the question being since Alabama does not play until Friday, that means there's gonna be almost 2 weeks in between Hofstra's last game and their first game of the NCAA tournament. Does that potentially give them any, lag or any slowdown given the fact that they just haven't played basketball and haven't played a game in that amount of days? That's a good question. I think that the slowness in which they play with, I think potentially is gonna help them from that standpoint, but I think that's a big one. Brock the Baller, I have it up here. Alabama plays Hofstra in the first round of the NCAA tournament. We're gonna be facing if Alabama can advance, they will face either Texas Tech or Akron. And then that top pod of Michigan, UMBC, Georgia, St. Louis, and Howard is going to be Alabama's potential Sweet 16 matchup should they make it past Hofstra and Texas Tech or Akron. So Alabama does get a solid draw. I do think that this is a draw that is very favorable for Alabama. The SEC teams in this one are Tennessee and Kentucky. Obviously, Alabama has wins over both of those teams. I liked the idea of a rematch with Georgia, potentially in the SEC tournament. Obviously, Georgia fell to Ole Miss. I think that Georgia or St. Louis potentially could give Michigan a little bit of a run in that top bracket or top pod, so to speak. Santa Clara is a really good team. I think Wright State's a good team. So Virginia potentially, Kentucky. Those are some that they're going to have to watch out for. I think that Kentucky is also, skilled enough to potentially beat a team like Iowa State. I don't know that I would pick them to, but I definitely think that they have that skill and that ability. Um, Iowa State is a team that lost to Arizona on Friday in the Big 12 Conference tournament. They also have losses this season to Kansas, Cincinnati, TCU, BYU, Texas Tech, and another one to Arizona as well. So I think that Kentucky definitely has an ability to be able to beat them. But Iowa State is also a team that can turn it on. Iowa State beat Purdue like 23 points earlier this season, right? Iowa State is a team that's absolutely dominant in what they do with the basketball. They're a really, really good defensive team. They're fourth in the country. And that is something that, we'll be curious to see how Kentucky kind of matches up with that. Iowa State's led by Joshua Jefferson, 6'9". He was second in the country in the Ken Palm Player of the Year rankings. Obviously, Cameron Boozer kind of ran away with that one, but a really, really good player and a guy who can really take over a game, both scoring the basketball and defensively. He's just a really, really good player, and we'll be curious to see how Kentucky really matches up with him. But I do think that Alabama got as favorable a draw as they potentially could have. I think that again, the Virginia and Iowa State matchup
as your 2-3. I do not think it's the worst options for 2-3. I think that Michigan is an option at the 1 seed. That obviously Michigan went on a really, really big run this season, and especially given the fact that they did lose in their championship, um, or yeah, lost in their championship game to Purdue earlier today. They are going to be somebody that is going to be out for blood. They're not going to want to going to want to drop another game. However, when you also look at some of the games that they've lost this season, they lost a game earlier this season to Wisconsin by 3. Wisconsin also played them to 3 on Saturday. And what does Wisconsin do as a basketball team? Wisconsin is a team that took 38 threes against Michigan in the March Madness tournament, or sorry, in their conference tournament. When Wisconsin beat them, Wisconsin took 33 threes and shot 45%. Um, they're a team that shoots a lot of threes, that plays fairly quick. Um, Wisconsin is a better offensive team than defensive team. They don't turn over the basketball a lot. They're third in the country in turnovers. They're similar to Alabama in that sense. They don't force a ton of turnovers. They take a lot of threes. They play pretty fast. They're a bad offensive rebounding team. Um, you know, Wisconsin is a team that is a fairly similar matchup to what Alabama would be. And the fact that Michigan has struggled in 2 games against them definitely gives you a little bit of an idea. Obviously, Michigan is a team that has Yaxel Lindenberg, really, really good player. Namari Burnett, obviously, Alabama should know him very well. Elliot Cadeau, that was previously at North Carolina, that we faced actually in our Final Four run um, at North Carolina. Um, has become a much better 3-point shooter than he was at North Carolina. That North Carolina season, he was the guy who Alabama kind of let just take shots in that matchup. In LA, he ended up going 2 for 5. I think he hit 2 shots early, and Alabama still just kind of played off of him. But he was 18% 3-point shooter that year. He's up to 37% this season, obviously. So you're gonna have to play him much differently than you did in LA. But this Michigan team is a team that Alabama probably has the most knowledge of some of these players. I'm sure with the actual Lindenberg previously being at UAB, even though we weren't really in the Yaxel sweepstakes last season, I'm sure that Nate Oates has seen kind of what his play looks like. So I do think that Michigan was the 1 seed that potentially gave Alabama the best chance for success. Now, is Alabama going to be able to beat them if they play like they did against Ole Miss? Absolutely not. Alabama's going to lose in the first round, and Hofstra is going to win. But if you want me to say if I think that Alabama has a chance, 100%. I think that Michigan is the team that Alabama has the best matchup with because I think that Michigan does it in a different way than some other teams do it, right? Michigan does not do it in the sense of Florida or Arizona where they just beat you down in the front court, right? Where they just absolutely dominate you in the front court and, their defense is so physical that you're not going to be able to get off any shots from 3. Um, Michigan does an okay job limiting 3-point shots, or limiting, I guess, your percentage from 3. But Michigan also plays fast. And Michigan this season has allowed like 42% from deep. And Michigan this season, again, has lost to Wisconsin once. And in this rematch with Wisconsin, it was a 3-point game, and it was largely based on Wisconsin shooting a ton of threes. Um, you know, but keep in mind, this Michigan team beat Gonzaga by 40, right? They beat Auburn by 30. So this Michigan team absolutely early in the season peaked at a level that many teams were incapable of being able to even play at. Their only 3 losses of the season are to Wisconsin, Purdue, and Duke. There's no shame in any of those losses. This is a solid number 1 team. This is a really, really good team. But I do think that their weaknesses and what you've seen this season potentially plays into what Alabama could be good at. Um, right? I think that Alabama and Michigan do not match up terribly. I think that this is a solid matchup for Alabama, and it's because when you look at the point distribution on like what Michigan does, like where do they give up their points? They give up their points from the 3-point line. And as we've said for many, many years and has always been the case, in March, guards win. And the 3-point line is the great equalizer.
And no matter what you want to say about Alabama basketball this season, from an effort standpoint, from a rebounding standpoint, from any standpoint, the thing that you can absolutely point to is Alabama has really, really good guards with starting at the top with LeBaron Philon and Aiden Holloway. They've got great backup guards in Latrell Wrightsell, Amari Allen, Jalil Bethea, Houston Millette. Some of these guys come off the bench and they would be starters in many places. You have Amari Allen that can play kind of that hybrid position that play a guard on offense and play a forward on defense. The fact that you have these guys and what they're capable of, I think that Alabama is more than capable of winning a game against Michigan. But again, you can't get ahead of yourself. Alabama first has to play Hofstra, and this is a Hofstra team that is going to give Alabama some struggle. I think that Alabama can definitely win the game, but they're going to give Alabama some fight. Obviously, as soon as we get off of this, I'm going to go deep dive some Hofstra film. I will, of course, look at some Akron and Texas Tech film as well, but want to deep dive Hofstra. I want to give them their due because that's the team that Alabama faces. And as Nate Oates says many times, in March Madness, even your mid-majors, they had to win a conference tournament to get here. And even in this case, Alabama didn't even win their own. So Hofstra is on a winning streak and Alabama is not. They absolutely are going to be prepared for Alabama. The question is who wins the game. If you have to ask me, obviously I'm going to take Alabama. I think that Nate Oates is a great coach at preparing his teams for March Madness. Obviously, the one exception we have to that was the Notre Dame game back in 2022 where Javon Quinterly tears his ACL in that game, and then Alabama just loses. I mean, no other way to put it. Alabama loses the game based off Cormac Ryan just going absolutely off, and Alabama loses the game. But other than that, Alabama has done a very good job in March Madness being prepared. I think that he does a great job getting his team prepared and letting them know, like, hey, I understand your defense wasn't great this season. But as we talked about in that Final Four run, it doesn't matter what your defense did this season. It doesn't matter what your offense did this season. It doesn't matter what your rebounding looked like this season. None of that matters. What matters is what do you put on the floor when you step foot on that court in Tampa on Friday? On Friday this week, you're going to go to Tampa and you're going to face Hofstra. What do you look like when you step foot on that floor? That's the only thing that matters. If you're a great rebounding team, then cool, that's who you are. If you're a bad rebounding team, then cool, that's who you are. When Alabama made their Final Four run 2 years ago, the banner behind me, I don't know if y'all know this, but the blue scarf that's hanging, I have a Final Four pin sitting over there. Like, I was in attendance for that Final Four. I was also in Los Angeles for their Sweet 16 Elite 8 games. That team that was in Los Angeles for that Sweet 16 Elite 8 was a good defensive team. I don't care that their Ken Palm was 111th in the country that season. The team that I saw in person was a solid defensive team. They were a top 40 defensive team. And Nate Oates said it. He said, I don't care what the defense did this season. You got to do this to advance in March. And that's what we've got to do. And so, that's exactly what this team has to do. This team has to look at itself in the mirror and understand, I understand you lost to Ole Miss. It was a terrible loss. You probably cost yourself a 3 seed. However, this is the bracket that sits in front of you. The bracket that sits in front of you has Hofstra on it first, has a rematch, has a matchup with Texas Tech and Akron on its second, whichever one can win that first round matchup, and then has Michigan potentially as your Sweet 16. Obviously, there's plenty of other teams in this bracket, but that's really what your path to the Elite Eight potentially looks like. And no matter what you did this season, from a rebounding, from a defense, from any of those perspectives, Alabama has to just sit down and say, we got to be better. And it starts game one. Starts practice one. We're going to be a better defensive team. We're going to be a better rebounding team. We're going to actually give some effort. Because if Alabama gives the effort that we saw on Friday against Ole Miss, they will lose against Hofstra. It will happen. Alabama has to just understand that there's no more losses. You lose and you go home. And I think that Nate Oates has done a really good job of being that coach. His career, he has done a great job of being that coach. I'm very curious to see what it looks like this season. Okay. I want to answer a bunch of questions you guys have. Obviously, I know we had a couple of questions in here already, but please, everybody, throw some questions down in the bottom. Again, if you have not subscribed already, if you could do me a favor and subscribe to the YouTube channel, I would really appreciate it. I know we've got a ton of people in here watching. I know we got over 20 people on YouTube and a little under 100 people on Twitter. If you are not subscribed to the channel, like Stacy said earlier, I am less than 50 away from 1K, and we're trying to see if we can hit it during March Madness. Please, any other questions you guys have, throw them down in the bottom. We're not going to stay live for too terribly long because I do want to take some time and do some research. I am, as I said previously, if y'all are new around here, I am recording tomorrow with Jordan Harper of the Double Dribble podcast, previously of Tide Illustrated, Jordan Harper 24 over, or sorry, Harper Nation 24 over on Twitter. Me and Jordan are going to talk about the Alabama basketball route to the Final Four. We're going to talk first and foremost about that Alabama Hofstra game and then the potential Alabama Texas Tech or Alabama Akron game. Those are the ones we're going to kind of hit on tomorrow. Try to get it out tomorrow night. I think that this is a really favorable matchup for Alabama, as I've said. But I think that I want to be able to sit down and do a true deep dive on this team before I tell you absolutely what I think about them. What questions do you guys have? Tell you what, I may actually even be able to record tonight with Jordan. So tell you guys what, Jordan's reaching out and asking if we can record tonight. So let me let you guys go. I'm going to do some research on this Hofstra team on Akron and Texas Tech so that I can be most prepared for what this matchup looks like and have it ready to go out as quickly as possible. I really do appreciate you guys for joining the live stream today. Obviously, I know that it's been a little bit of kind of hectic with the March Madness stream going on. I really appreciate y'all for joining me. Hopefully, it learned a little bit. Obviously, as I said, we're going to be talking about Alabama versus Hofstra, as well as the potential 512 who they would be facing with Akron and with Texas Tech. If you are new around here, a couple of things. Subscribe to the channel for more sports, Alabama sports content. Right now, we're all Alabama basketball as March Madness is going on. I know Alabama football has some stuff going on as well. Jackson Lloyd's been officially announced is going to be our starting left tackle this season. I think Grayson Delegati is going to be our starting center. There's a ton of things going on that front. We're going to talk about it after March Madness is over. So, any of the football fans, we will talk about that. But basketball season is going on, and I can't let basketball out to dry. This is kind of my baby. This is what I talk about the most. So definitely want to cover March Madness and give it the due that it deserves, and then go into the basketball and football coverage because transfer portal opens up for basketball, and then football fall practice or sorry spring practice is underway. Additionally, as you will see scrolling down below, barnesonbama.com is where the written content falls. If you're on Twitter, I also do tweet it out. That is the deep dive threads. We will absolutely have one for Hofstra. We will have one for every game this tournament. No matter if we've played them before or not, I will absolutely make sure that we get full breakdowns for every single game this March Madness. Preview and predictions for these first round games are going to come out. In that video, I am going to record with Jordan Harper. So if you guys are interested in that, as I said, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I really would appreciate it. Last but certainly not least, we are a part of the Believe Podcast Network. And so if you hear any ads on Apple or Spotify, I am a part of that network. And anything you can do to help out those sponsors, I would really appreciate.
But thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.